Welcome back to Arena. Arena is a place for questions, for big questions. And this time through, we're thinking about questions of sex, death, and the meaning of life. Which is to say that we're thinking about questions of where we're from, and where we're going, and what we're supposed to do, and how we're supposed to live in the meantime. And with each of these questions, we're trying to look at how the life and the person of Jesus might help us understand the answers. This week, I want to start us off with perhaps an odd question. What is the meaning of sex? It seems to me something that people don't quite agree on. If I may be really bold, I'd suggest that as a society, and perhaps even as individuals, we both make too much of sex and too little of sex at the same time. It's both overrated and underrated. On the one hand, and this probably goes back to Freud, we see sexuality as the most important, fundamental, defining thing about who we are. On the other hand, we live in a society where apps like Tinder and phrases like casual sex exist. Sex as an act becomes essentially meaningless. And there seems to me to be a bit of a contradiction there, a tension. On the one hand, our desires are the most essential and important thing about us. They give us our true deep meaning. And yet on the other hand, the actions that come out of those desires are essentially meaningless unless we choose to give them meaning. So can both of those things be true at once? Now, this is why Christians might say that we have both overrated and underrated sex at the same time. I'll lay some groundwork and then explain what I mean by that. Firstly, and this is important, God, throughout the Bible, is unashamedly pro-sex. In fact, if, as we thought about last time, Jesus created absolutely everything, then that would include our bodies and our sexuality. And if, as we also saw last time, Jesus performed his first miracle at a wedding, then that would suggest that he's not totally opposed to sexual relationships. He seems to think they're worth celebrating as well. Secondly, and this might be a surprise if your experience of Christians has been that they're judgmental, Jesus doesn't seem especially concerned with anybody's sexual history. Now, don't get me wrong, Jesus tells absolutely everyone who comes to follow him that they have to change in some way, and that includes our sexuality. But Jesus just doesn't seem that bothered by it to begin with. His followers have a pretty broad range of backgrounds. His mother, for example, was famously the Virgin Mary. And yet Jesus was criticized throughout his life for hanging out with prostitutes. In fact, he even says in one of the other stories of Jesus' life that the prostitutes were entering the kingdom of heaven before the priests. So if sexuality is not a great taboo subject or something that we should have nothing to do with altogether, then what is it? Well, the beginning of a Christian answer would be to say that it is a picture and it's a gift. Now, firstly, it's a picture, and this is going to sound extremely strange, but the Bible often uses sex as a picture of the kind of relationship that God has with people who believe in him, who trust him, who know him. When God wants to describe what the sort of intimacy is that people can have with God, when he wants to give a picture for what his love for humanity is like, he invents sex as a picture of that love. And so it is that we can make both too much of it and too little of it at the same time. Take your phone's lock screen, for example. What picture have you chosen to be your lock screen? Perhaps it's a picture of a loved one, your family, a boyfriend or a girlfriend. Perhaps it's a picture of a favourite sports team. Perhaps it's a favourite location. Perhaps it's something that reminds you of an event or a memory. Now, that picture matters because the people in that picture matters. What it represents matters. You wouldn't want that picture to be lost or deleted because the people in that picture matter to you. At the same time, a picture is only a picture. Perhaps it's bad enough at the best of times to be distracted by our phones when there are people around us. But imagine if you were sat opposite your fiancé and just scrolling through. Even if you were looking at pictures of them, you'd be making a mistake. You'd be swapping the real thing for a picture. At the same time, our sexuality is a gift. Now, even the smallest gifts can have some real significance because of the person who gives it to us, and this is a gift that comes from God himself. At the same time, when we give gifts, we usually have some sort of intention, some purpose in mind. We give someone a gift so that they would do something particular with it. And so it is with this gift. Jesus, the creator and the giver of the gift, has a particular intention behind it. It is that picture that communicates something profound about the way God feels towards humanity. And to use it in some other way might mean that we miss out on that deepest meaning. Now, all this gets us to the beginning of what Christians are talking about when they talk about sin. Sin is not just breaking some arbitrary rules given by God for no apparent reason, but to check that everyone will do what he says. No, the underlying issue in sin is that we swap the person for the picture, that we care more about the gift than the one who gave it to us. And all this brings us to some of the ideas that we're going to think about in the next episode of Jesus' life. This is from the beginning of chapter 4. Now, Jesus had to go through Samaria. He came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" Now, this is a very familiar setup within the Bible stories so far. In fact, if you were going to make this into a film now, in the modern day, perhaps this scene would take place in a busy Manhattan coffee shop, and Jesus and this woman would both reach for the same cup of coffee at the end of the bar at the same time. Or perhaps it would take place on the first day of university, and Jesus and this woman are walking through a busy corridor, they bump into each other, and Jesus helps her pick up all of her books. It's that kind of a scene. If you are familiar with the Bible stories so far, you would know that any time two people meet at a well, a wedding follows pretty shortly afterwards. But this time, there's a twist. This time, they don't stick to the script. And the conversation that follows is at times awkward, at other times very intrusive, and most of the time just plain confusing. But what happens in this conversation is that Jesus suggests to this woman that he offers everything that she is looking for. And not just her, but the entire world.